just finished such an interesting conversation with Keith Thompson. You know, those conversations that really tickle the brain and get you thinking. Yeah. So you guys are in for a treat. If you're not familiar with Keith, he's an author, independent journalist. He's done talk, radio host shows. He's written a couple of books. He's the author of Angels and Aliens, and most recently, UFO Paradox. But yeah, the conversation we had today was so cool and just so invigorating. It's why I really like doing this and why I really relish speaking to interesting guests. We go through obviously his personal experiences, the consciousness aspects, the whole UFO experiences, the esoteric elements to it, how these beings interact with us, what the meaning of it is, motivations, and just so much more. I can't remember everything because I've just finished it. And yeah, if you haven't subscribed already, or you haven't liked the video, if you're going through it, do go through that, please. It really does help out the channel, helps out the algorithm, as that's how YouTube works. And it helps me put these conversations on the map. And that's the objective of this, right? Is to spread this out to a wider group, to larger groups of people, bigger demographics, so they can understand what is going on, so they too can, you know, pose the question and we can plant that seed to find out what is happening and get them to go on their own little journey themselves, like how many of you, of myself, have taken this as well, right? It started from one conversation, and the conversation today with Keith is definitely something which will spark those elements within you. You've got so many interesting ideas. I can't wait to delve into wherever we're going to go, wherever the path takes us. I guess, you know, just for people who may not be completely familiar with your work, and we're going to do the standard thing here. Do you mind giving a very quick overview a bit about yourself and yeah, how you got into this interesting yet confusing and curious subject of UFOs?
I'd be glad to. Actually, how I got into it is related to what I do. I'll start with that. I'm a journalist and an author, of course. I've written a few books. But I spent a lot of my time as an independent journalist. But I got my first assignment as a journalist when I was in the 6th grade, elementary school, 12 years old. In fact, it was an assignment. It wasn't by an editor. It was by my classroom teacher. She had a great format in the class called Current Events. And it was, we took turns as students bringing in a story that we would study. You know, cut the articles out of the newspapers when newspapers were the main way we got information, and then, you know, come in and be like a news reporter, tell the whole story, tell both sides if it was a debate. And I did. I told I grew up in Northwest Ohio here in the United States, and not far from Michigan, where there was a legendary UFO sighting, and controversial, lasted 3 or 4 days. So I essentially told the story to my class, and the debate in the UFO event itself, the sighting, had to do with to what extent maybe some of it might have been, could have been, possibly swamp gas. The Air Force consultant, J. Allen Hynek, who was brought in, as he often was, used the phrase swamp gas to refer to the possibility that maybe the luminous display, the lights near the local swamp, could have been swamp gas, which is, you know, when outgassing happens in a swamp, sometimes it ignites and there are colors and lights. He did not say that all of it was swamp gas. He was very tentative, but he was mortified at a news conference when he said that possibly some small part of it could have been swamp gas. The reporters jumped up from their seats, ran out into the hallway, got on the payphones, which is how people communicated at that time, and called their news bureaus to say Air Force explains it all away as swamp gas, which is not what he had done. But to me, that made the story richer. I got the sense this is the kind of wrinkle that is probably part of these stories all the time. These levels of confusion and misunderstanding and multiple understandings of the same event. So at the end of the presentation in class, one of my classmates said, "Well, Keith, do you think it's aliens from outer space?" And I said, "Well, you know, based on what people are reporting, I know some people believe that's what it could be, but I haven't reached that conclusion." And I noticed my teacher smiled and kind of nodded her head at me from the back of the room. And then another student raised their hand and said, "So if you don't think it was swamp gas, what was it?" And I said, "Well, when I say I don't think it was swamp gas, all I'm saying is that the full array of sightings and descriptions certainly were more complex than swamp gas." I may not have said complex, you know, I was just 12 years old, but I said the descriptions don't match that interpretation. that point, my teacher came up to the front. She said, I think what Keith is saying, class, is that with something like this, it's important to keep an open mind and to ask relevant questions like you are asking. And then she turned to me, and in that wonderful way teachers often do with a student, said, Mr. Thompson, that was quite a fine report. You have the makings of a reporter or maybe a scientist, possibly even a detective. And then I still can remember, she put her fists up a little bit enthusiastically and said, follow the evidence wherever it takes you. And I just want to say on a couple of levels how that influenced me. First of all, as a young person who was aspiring to be an adult, when you're 12 years old, you've decided the key is to be taken seriously, or at least it was for me. In other words, I had an impulse to be involved in interesting ideas and intellectual debates and politics and culture and news media. So here was my teacher saying, good report, you covered this well. But I described it in my book as a kind of benediction. It was almost a blessing. We often have statements from teachers or other authority figures like coaches, and most of us have some experience with some high school coach that wasn't good, or phys ed teacher who kind of put you down for not being fast enough. That wasn't one of my stories, but we have those kind of negative reinforcements from authority figures. And I'm not saying I've never had those, but in this case, I got a very positive reinforcement at a young age to follow the evidence wherever it leads. So right after the classroom report, I went onto the playground with my friends. We went out to recess, and I got to be a 12-year-old kid again. I did not that day decide I was going to be a UFO investigator. No, but I had a feeling that I wanted to write and be a journalist. So I became an investigative journalist. So it was out of that experience that led me to follow this. And that her little motto, follow the evidence wherever it leads, wherever it takes you, has been my credo on this, my belief, my core belief. Follow. If you come across evidence that doesn't fit established models of reality, you don't dismiss the evidence. You point to the fact that maybe our models aren't complete. Maybe our maps aren't complete. When Magellan and Christopher Columbus came to the so-called New World with their maps, literally sometimes on the maps they had phrases, sea serpents out here, dragons out here. In other words, what was unknown was where the sea serpents were. Sea serpents. Well, that's not a bad phrase. Well, modern science actually has its own sea serpents. When they say, well, this phenomenon couldn't be real because we know time and space are such that these events couldn't be happening in this way. Well, my response is maybe we don't have the full picture of time and space. That doesn't mean I believe every report either, but I've come to see when there's a consistency of evidence, and there is a very strong witness to this phenomenon being real. The question is, maybe our maps of reality need to be broadened to include paranormal and other kinds of elements that currently we don't acknowledge as real.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I just want to reflect on what you just said as well about the whole having those authority type figures who can influence you positively. It just reminds me of, I haven't thought about this in a long time, but when I was in school, I remember I was in religious studies. I think I was about the same age, to be fair, 11 or 12. And we're talking about how strong the faith was of the Catholic or church. And I remember I put my hand up and I posed a question. And I was very young at this time, right? And I think just around that time was the attacks in London, the terrorist attacks. And I said to the teacher innocently, right? I was like, could you then therefore think or say that the terrorists, even though what they did was, disgusting and not right, and it was all of those things, but could you argue that their faith is actually stronger because they've given their life for their cause? I got sent out of class.
I'm not surprised. I'm not. And you raised that as a question, not as a dogmatic assertion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in fact, it follows with the idea that religious faith, if it determines our actions, then here's a religious faith that is pretty darn committed. They're willing to blow the hell up out of everything, including they get to go to a better heaven if they die in the process. That's faith.
Yeah. And I was just and I got put out of it. And then for me, it had the effect where, why can't I ask that? Why is it like? And for me anyway, it posed a question. I was always curious as a child anyway, like asking these type of questions and stuff. But it's just I haven't thought about it in a while. But when you mentioned it, I was thinking, what effect did that have on me, and how I viewed the world and how to question things and be curious and stuff. So, but on the other bits as well, you know, you mentioned about following the data and that sort of stuff. So I wanted to ask you yourself. Obviously, you've got two books out now, if that's correct, right? You've got Angels and Demons, and you've got the UFO Paradox, which come out just recently. What was the kind of point for you then that made you question reality?
Well, that comes to another way I got into this. I described the first story I told you was, I call it my objective approach.
Mm-hmm.
The follow the evidence, follow the facts, get multiple interpretations. And that's the approach I ended up taking with many stories. I've not only covered these kinds of phenomena, but I've written about education and health and fitness and all kinds of mainstream topics. But it's really the same paradigm: follow the evidence, get multiple views. But there were also experiences I had in my youth that I'll summarize briefly. One was when I was 14 years old. We lived in a house where we could get out, climb out the window, or through various ways. You could get up on top of the roof. Now, we were not allowed to get on the top of our house because it was a 3-story house, and it was dangerous. But I knew there were a couple of nooks and crannies. And I would go up on the roof when my mom and dad weren't there, or when there was no chance of being discovered, and just literally lay back with my head against my body against the tiles of the roof, looking into the sky, and just totally opening to the space of everything, and just reflecting. You know, it's sort of up on the roof. When the world starts getting you down, go to the top of the roof. So one day I did go to the roof, and I looked into the sky. It was a beautiful spring or summer day, maybe autumn, I don't recall, and with no purpose or aim or goal. And suddenly I had the experience of being everywhere and yet nowhere at all. Everywhere at once, but no place in particular. And it was rather than startling, it was astonishing, but it was the sense of, oh, this is how things really are. It was a sense of kind of a total presence. And there was a sense of a light. I was infused. I felt surrounded by a brilliant light, and that I felt like I was lifted beyond time and space, very frankly, now that I can use that kind of language. And yet it wasn't a non-ordinary experience. It was non-ordinary, but it felt like, oh, this is the truth of things. My family was not deeply religious. I often say we were nominally religious, Christian, Episcopalian, as a matter of fact. And it was a kind of a relationship to religion where it was good for good people to be seen at church, to be seen going to church.
Yeah.
There was no deep conviction involved. But for my mom, especially, it was important that the boys go to church because they might be better, they might be good more often. But there was no hellfire, brimstone, nor was there any orientation to mystical illumination. But I came to realize, I had a very strong sense that this was this was about God. This was the God space. This was center court. This was the design mind, the Tao, the spirit, the soul. You can all the words that go with religious experience. And it led me to become interested in spiritual things and follow. So I began to read. I read Alan Watts and read about Eastern religions, and took up meditation at some point. So it was an opening to a broader life. But the specific thing that came clear in that, beyond the sense of the special effects of it all, was that life itself is filled with purpose and meaning. And if that's the case, then my life has purpose and meaning in a way that I now realize, our mainstream view of reality, physicalism or materialism, does not acknowledge that there's intrinsic meaning. We give things meaning, although it's funny. How do we give things meaning? Where does meaning at all come from? What's the significance of things being meaningful if this is merely dead matter? which is a larger conversation. So there's that experience, and I'll just refer more succinctly to one I had over a decade later. I was body surfing off the coast of Hawaii with a group of friends. We were visiting and vacationing together. I was in my late 20s. I got carried out by stronger waves than I expected. The riptides were very strong. And I had what I now realize, but had no idea at the time, was a true near-death experience. When I say had a near-death experience, but I didn't know what it was, it's because I just happened to be old enough that the near-death experience had not yet been made famous by Raymond Moody in his book, Life After Life. And so I did not know about the tunnel, but I went through a tunnel. I saw figures of light and wisdom. I saw deceased relatives.
Wow.
I had a life review process. I was convinced I was dead. In fact, oh, by the way, when I was in the water and crushed by these waves, there came a moment when I thought I was rising from the bottom of the ocean, but in fact, I was rising above the ocean. I was having what I did not know at the time was an out-of-body experience. I left my body through the back of my head. I saw the body that I had recognized as the identity of who I am, as the subject of who I am, but it couldn't be the subject because now my body was an object, and there was still an I that was seeing that, not through that, but seeing that which I considered to be me. So I thought, I remember when I say I, it was still the sense of awareness. Well,
Yeah.
I continue to exist, but I'm more than the body. And I said, oh, dead isn't dead. And it was with a sense of peace and tranquility, acceptance, that the passage between life and death is, I see why we take it seriously. It seems to be the end for this, except I don't think it is the end for this. I did come back to my body. That's why I'm here today. There was a key point, and this goes to my revised view of reality. I heard my friends on the shore. I saw my friends on the shore talking to Keith, the body, who was flailing in the water 100 or more yards out, 200 yards out. And one of my friends, Mary, remained a dear friend all my life, said to her, another friend of ours, why didn't Keith listen? I told him it wasn't safe. I told him not to go out there. Why didn't he listen? So at that moment, I went to Mary, if you will. From as awareness, I said to Mary, and I'm okay. It's actually okay. I'm here, and she was still saying, why didn't he listen? I thought, oh, I guess I am dead because I can hear them, but they can't hear me. So in some strange sense, it confirmed it. And I was trying to communicate not only that I was okay, but you're okay. This is okay. That there is no end. And I was, so in any case, I came back to my body. I didn't have that moment that near-death experiencers often have, which is the voice, the wise voice saying, you're not ready, you must return. You know, I didn't remember having that, but I did return to my body, interestingly surrounded by two dolphins that seemed to be escorting me to the shore. I often call it right out of Central Casting.
That is crazy.
Yeah, so too crazy. And even at the time, well, I know at the time I didn't even think of it, but within a day I thought, well, I got brought back by dolphins. And here's the key thing I learned from that. Well, a couple of things. First of all, when my friends on shore, after they got me out and they saw that I was not, broken up, my bones weren't broken, I didn't have, I was not in bad shape. I had some cuts and scrapes for sure. One of them said, Keith, we really thought you had given it up out there. I can still remember that phrase, given it up, given up the ghost. And I was very lucid. And I said, I did. I did. You're exactly right. How did you know? And he goes, I could tell by the response on his face that that wasn't what he expected me to say. And that I was coming across as delirious. As I say, I was very lucid. I still had that panoramic view. In some sense, that has never left. I mean, it's kind of a hard bell to unring when you've seen that big picture. So I learned very quickly, this is not a conversation to have casually at parties and at the grocery store. How are you? Oh, let me tell you about one time I died and came back. No, and it's a little bit like UFO experiences. When people say they saw a light and it followed them for 2 hours and there's a missing period of time, and they start telling people that, and then people start to hum the X-Files tune, and you just know there's no way out of it. So I came to take it lightly. But here's
Yeah.
just one more detail of this. After surviving, the next day I said to my friend Mary, we were renting a house together, and Keith had survived, so there was celebration. I said, Mary, could we go for a walk? She said, sure. And she thought maybe I was still, maybe in need of something. And I said, I heard what you said yesterday. She said, what do you mean? I said, at the shore. Why didn't he listen? I told him it was unsafe. Why did he go out there? Laszlo, I watched the blood drain out of her face.
I
As
bet.
I said, we were both in our 20s. We had not studied. We did not know the debates in science about where consciousness begins or ends, or does it end? What's the relationship of consciousness to the body? But we both knew that for me to have heard that with my body out, very far out, and with the thunderous waves crashing, these were big waves. This is where the National Surfing Championship would happen. I was very lucky and very foolhardy to be so cavalier about body surfing. In any case, we both knew that I had heard it in a non-local way, which is very characteristic of near-death experiences. People come back from a surgery, and the doctor says, I'm ready to tell you your prognosis now that the anesthesia has worn off, and the patient groggily says, I already know the prognosis. I heard you talking with Dr. Smith in the other wing of the hospital 2 hours ago. You were eating spaghetti, and I see some of it is still on your tie. I mean, these are the kinds of wake-up calls that mainstream materialist physicians get, and it causes them to say, well, I don't believe that, but it's not a question of whether I believe it. This is evidence that my education is not complete. And the best near-death researchers, in my view, similar to the best UFO researchers, are people who can say, okay, my belief system is still here, but the reality is out here somewhere. So how to cross that bridge between what I currently believe and open, not believe in a larger reality, but open to the possibility that the evidence points to a larger reality. Yeah. It's not a question of belief, although the belief comes. Of course, you begin to core. I now believe that the body is not, the brain does not generate consciousness. It doesn't produce consciousness. It's a transmitter of consciousness. It's a receptive organ. It's permissive of consciousness. That's a larger set of issues we could talk about.
It's the modem, isn't it? It's like the internet modem. It's just in between it all. So,
and the brain plays a role. I mean, if my radio is broken, I'm not going to get the broadcast. Some people say, that means the broadcast originates inside the broken radio. No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't. But yes, the brain has a role to play. If I have some damage in this part of my brain, it might affect my ability to see colors. Doesn't mean that it creates the subjective experience of color. And that's the mystery. That's the big mystery of consciousness. Subjective consciousness. There's something it is like to be me. What is that experience? There's something it is like to be me right now. What's that? And the answer is, I'll probably be silent, because I don't know what it's like to be me, except that there is something it is like to be me, or you, or us.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there to unpack. I just want to firstly appreciate the overview there. I can see, I mean, for me, what I'm getting anyway is, and you can, I don't know if you've read the book, I think it's by Nona Coxhead, The Relevance of Bliss. It has like a series of just it's basically loads of people through history, and she depicts all of their experiences, and it's spontaneous experiences, and some are religious, some are more paranormal or spiritual. And ultimately what it does is it puts that person when they have that feeling of God or the oneness of the universe, and they typically have this feeling of being enveloped in this light. And it ultimately just I'll include the link in the description because it's a really great book, and my surname's Bliss as well, so my auntie gave it to me. She's like, I found this book for you, and I was like, thank you. But it sounds like what you had on that rooftop as a child was something, and it's spontaneous. It happens in the most random. People may, what the book kind of shares is that people may, you have to go through some sort of trauma or some sort of joyous occasion, but it can be random. It can be so random. You could just be, just as you said, sitting on the no motivation, just wanted to look at the sky, and boom, it kind of hits you. So that sounds like what kind of happened to you, which ultimately puts you in this seat of, what was that? I want to, like, it takes you away from the usual materialistic, reductionist type worldview and puts you in this different space where you start questioning it. And to having such a young age as well, to balance that between being a kid and just doing the usual stuff as well was probably something you had to kind of go through as well. But
let me just say something about that. I can tell you, and I can tell your listeners and viewers that one thing I did not do when I crawled down from the roof that day. When my mother said later, "What did you do this afternoon, Keith?" I did not tell her that I didn't tell her I went on the roof, for sure. That was grounding. That was basis for being grounded easily. But I did not also say, "Oh, I experienced the lack of division between myself and the rest of the universe." And
yeah,
it's the most normal thing there is, that none of us, there is no division. No, but I must say, that's what I kind of realized. And so I felt I was in on a secret. And you're right. It was not, I often don't, I learned not to talk about it, because when I did find even people who were open to it, I was aware that it can sound like I was bragging about an achievement I had had. I'd
yeah,
had an accomplishment. I'd had a realization. And the truth is, a lot of people turn to spiritual practice precisely to desperately want to have a oneness experience. And I learned that it was poor manners to
yeah.
say, "Oh, I had one of those. How did you produce it, Keith?
Hmm.
What practices were you doing?" "I'm just watching the sky." And,
Yeah,
and so, and yet there are reports in all the great mystical traditions. People do practice, and that in meditative states they can open to. So it's spontaneous. It can also come through practice. It actually happens. Professional athletes. It doesn't. I say athletes because you mentioned trauma. There's something about extreme states. Now, my being on the roof, there was nothing extreme except the height, but there was no fear. There was no sense of trauma. But it was like a rupture between this realm and the larger realm. When I say rupture, I want to make it clear that it wasn't a deep sense of division, but it was an opening, a sudden
mm,
opening to there's more here than I know. And my impulse to keep it secret reflected that it was probably not wise to talk about it. In
mm,
the same sense that I got the same message from my near-death experience. Don't casually talk about that. Then when I found out about the near-death, I'm going to tell you one more story. My friends from Hawaii, after we all got back to life, a friend of mine back in California where I was living said, "Well, that's the near-death experience." I said, "What do you mean, the near-death experience?" And so he told me about the book by Raymond Moody. I sat down and read it. There's also books by an author named Dr. Kenneth Ring, R-I-N-G, a near-death researcher, remarkable, became a friend of mine who gave me a lot of guidance on how to deal with the implications of all of this. In any case, my friends would call me. I still remember getting phone calls from my friends from Hawaii. "Keith, do you know about this book by Raymond Moody?" I said, "Yes." "Well, what you went through was real." "Yes, like I told you." "Well, but you understand why we didn't believe you." "Yes." "And we're still good?" "Yes."
yeah,
I mean, it was like every answer was yes, because I totally understood. I knew I'd be hearing from them.
yeah,
When
yeah.
I found out about this, I said, "I'm going to hearing from these people." And so I wasn't treated as a returning hero, but
Mm,
my reality had, once again, a benediction, a blessing. I had confirmation from the universe in the terms of my social network that what I had gone through was real. And
mm,
it's certainly experientially real. And by the way, after the experience, I also, simply because, follow the evidence wherever it leads. I don't want to be misled. I don't
mm,
want to take on beliefs that are self-serving. So I read the books by the debunkers, the attempted efforts to debunk the near-death experience as nothing other than brain programs that get launched when there's a lack of oxygen to the brain. The afterlife scenarios of heaven are totally illusory. I'm actually willing to concede that might be the case. But I mean, just in principle, that could be a brain on low oxygen phenomenon. But what doesn't get explained in my experience and the experience of others is the non-local communications, overhearing things that are way beyond time and space as we know.
Yeah.
Non-local.
That it, when I was very young, when I was as a kid, all these experiences, but I don't know how old I was, but I remember waking up and I was in a panic state and whatever, and I still can't describe this to this day. And I'd love if anyone was listening to this, and maybe you would understand. But everything around me was really big and small. There were shapes everywhere. But the point I'm making is everything was so loud, like extremely loud. And I remember telling everyone to shh, like be quiet. And I was in the corner just hugging myself. I was very young, and I remember the reason I'm telling you this is because I remember I remember my dad downstairs speaking, and I remember him saying, "What's going on up there?" or something like that. And I told them after that as well. So that, and I still don't know what that was today. It felt like I had some mini DMT trip. It was very psychedelic, like shapes, geometry type things warping around this stuff. But it plays into what you're saying about the kind of your perceptions are heightened in a sense where you can hear things that wouldn't normally be possible in any capacity that we know anyway. So you mentioning that kind of brought up to that, and I didn't really think of it before as well, but the whole sound thing as well, because I was like, everything's so loud. So why is everyone shouting? Everyone be quiet. And then I remember myself, well, no, we're whispering. And it was like boom, boom in my ears. And I was like, everyone stop speaking. So there's something at play with it anyway that plays in our perception with the consciousness as well. And that's why maybe our brains are not really equipped potentially to deal with that, because it's so visually just and audibly just attacking us in that sense. We can't deal with it as well, so we have to kind of build ourselves up to it anyway. But
well, you may be familiar with we won't go too deeply into this, but there is a neuroscientist named Donald Hoffman,
of course,
who has written about this, the case against reality, I think he calls it. And I'm not sure if I've got his title quite right, but his argument is that our perceptual set, our cognitive structure evolved not to find out the truth of things, but to adapt to survive. So we are oriented in our senses to get signals of sight, sound, touch, smell, so forth, that enable us to survive, to avoid danger, and to reproduce. He doesn't say that we can't open to larger realities, but it's not the norm. Our cognitive structures. So these experiences very often do come with a sense of trauma. As a friend of mine, Dr. Jeff Chronicle, religion scholar at Rice University, very, very, very cool guy in exploring these realms, what he calls impossible experiences, by which he means officially impossible. He said that very often trauma is at the heart of it. He said, by the way, you nearly died. I mean, how much more of a trauma is there from the standpoint of the mind-body organism? I came to realize the mind-body organism will fall away, and some sense of consciousness sort of continues. Okay, that's a larger set of issues, a larger book. But in any case, to the body-mind, it is a trauma. And even coming back from my Hawaii experience, I had gone from, I just will say, there were 3 stages. One was, at the first stage, I was desperately trying to survive in a drowning situation. Every instinct of the mind-body unit called Keith was trying to survive. Next minute, I was rising out of my body with a sense of sense of awareness, experience, subjective presence that wasn't the body. And then the next thing I know, in the 3rd stage, I'm suddenly back in the body, looking through these 2 eyes again, with 2 dolphins bringing me to shore with friends. I go, oh, first thing I said to my friends, did you see all that? And by all that, I meant sort of like you would have said about your bedroom experience. Did Mom and Dad, did you hear about this? Did you hear anything up in my room? Because that's what I said. It was so real. It was truly hyper real. And my friend said, did we see all what? And I said, oh, no, you didn't. I saw something. It actually confirmed the sense that I had seen a larger sense of reality. So in any case, that I can say in terms of the book, maybe kind of bring it around to my book on UFOs, which we haven't discussed much, but that's fine. I mean, the subject of UFOs. This explains how it was easy for me naturally to see the UFO phenomenon, the so-called saucer frame of reference, the alleged apparent craft that do come in with apparent creatures, entities. I always say apparent because they appear to be real. At what level, what kind of reality it is? Is it a larger reality that sometimes opens up? Is it a physical? Is it entirely physical? In any case, I came to see that that saucer frame of reference is really part of the same matrix as the near-death experience and paranormal phenomena in general: precognition, telepathy, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, mind in matter. It wasn't difficult to open to that idea. And, by the way, there's considerable scientific evidence now for the reality of the paranormal. People don't often know that. They think, oh, well, I've had my own experiences of telepathic and clairvoyant reality and perception. But they tend to assume certainly science will reject that. Well, science still does reject it. But that's simply because mainstream science has not acknowledged the reality. There's very good laboratory work that has been done that statistically proves the reality of paranormal experience beyond the standards that we ask for most scientific verification.
Dean Radin's a great guy. He's one of the main. That's what kind of opened up my portal in terms of understanding this whole subject.
I would mention, Dean Radin of the Institute of Noetic Sciences in California. For those who don't know, if you want to get a good education about the science of psi, PSI, or paranormal experience, the Institute of Noetic Sciences is really right up at the top.
Yeah, his two books. Is it Real Magic? And he's got another one called the
Conscious Universe, I think.
Yeah, he's got quite a few. I haven't read every single one, but he's so profound in the way his story as well, all the synchronicities. And once again, this is why this topic's so interesting. It can go to so many different angles and stuff. But just touching on the kind of the book as well and the kind of connection itself, how did you kind of bridge the gap between there? Did you have any personal experience yourself? I mean, obviously you mentioned the swamp gas thing before with Dr. Hynek, but was there, in your opinion, where is the connection between the phenomenon, or the strongest part of it? What's the best thread to kind of pull on?
Well, I would say one thing that the Michigan case that I covered as a young student taught me. I didn't quite realize it at the time as a teaching, but it introduced me to, and I became aware, oh, everything I need to know about this, or a whole lot of what I need to know about this phenomenon, was in that original experience. And it has to do with it's a sort of a consistent pattern. Ordinary people, credible people, respectable people from different walks of life who show no psychological pre-orientation to seeing something in the sky. Oh, sure, there are people who hallucinate all the time. So we account for those. We remove those from the sample. People who commit hoaxes, throw frisbees up and take photographs. Come on. That's nonsense. But there are attempts to do that. I'm talking about the percentage that cannot be explained in conventional terms. These people give witness. They give testimony. They come forward with reports, talk to the media. There's instantaneously a response from what I call the agents of official culture, typically presenting themselves as authorities on science and from the media and academia, who essentially, I should say, try to debunk the phenomenon. I go, oh, there's this point counterpoint. Evidence is presented, or firsthand testimony is presented, and it's immediately dismissed. And in the space that opens up between those two, point, counterpoint, there is the way there's a phenomenon is kind of driven underground. It is real, but it's not allowed to be given reality. That's the key point. It's when a reality is not acknowledged, but it is known to be there. In which area of our life don't we see that as a problem? We know that family secrets can often be toxic. If it's a secret, it's probably a secret because somebody's ashamed of what happened. And it might have been 3 generations ago. And the best psychologists now in family systems therapy will very often probe when they're working with a family that might be going through, dysfunctional communication patterns, trying to learn to be more healthy as a family unit. Somebody will mention, well, grandpa, my grandpa, well, what happened with grandpa? What happened? Maybe it was the death of a family member in the war that was never really grieved. These things are real. So this phenomenon works the same way. When people hold truths of experience that are not validated, then it goes underground. And I think this is a huge reason why this subject leads to what I call the laughter curtain. Even now, people say, what do you do, Keith? I'm a writer. Well, what are you writing about? Well, I've just done a book on the UFO phenomenon. So you just kind of know, I'm going to watch my watch and say, how long is it going to take for their reactions to come out? Oh, I think that's all nonsense. Okay, I know that argument. I go, oh, let me tell you about my experience, which is fine, but I don't necessarily have 20 minutes to hear their life story. So it's a very highly charged subject, and that's a big part of how it functions. So that was that point counterpoint, and the sense in which the reality tends to live underground. But I'll say one more thing about this. I used to hold to the idea that the agents of official culture, especially the debunkers in science who try to explain all this away, I tended to view them as gatekeepers that were keeping the phenomenon from being understood. Well, that's sort of one effect. They try to keep the phenomenon off the table. Mm-hmm. But I've actually come to see, no, this is a phenomenon that, for better or worse, is quite democratic. It interacts, it doesn't need gatekeepers. It goes beyond the gatekeepers. For example, it goes directly to the lives of real witnesses. I say, for example, the late astronomer Carl Sagan, who was kind of known for poo-pooing the UFO thing, although he said he certainly thought it was likely that there was probably life elsewhere in the universe. So it's a smart position to take. But he famously one time, almost like he'd been given a little truth serum and didn't remember, a little sodium pentothal. He said, with his marvelous accent, he'd often talk about billions and billions of galaxies. This is an enormously vast enterprise. Why would we place ourselves at the center of this vast, vast universe? In any case, he said, by the way, if they were coming, if the aliens were coming, why would they be picking on Betty and Barney Hill, driving home from bingo in New Hampshire? Wouldn't they contact scientists such as myself?
Yeah.
When I heard him say that, I said, why, Dr. Sagan, you're having a little contact envy, aren't you? You expect that because you are Carl Sagan, you've got your PhD. You're one of the great astronomers. You did the great TV series Cosmos. Why, certainly they'd want to talk with you. Well, maybe they have talked with you. Maybe you ought to check your memory. But beyond that, no. We don't know what the reasons why somebody like Betty and Barney Hill, or the two characters in Pascagoula, Mississippi that I write about, two fishermen who were hauled aboard a craft in 1973. So anyway, this is, to me, these unanswered questions are what keep it alive and interesting for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think especially with the cases you mentioned and the Carl Sagan thing as well, it's quite funny because, I mean, that's just probably his ego speaking as well. But maybe these beings, they're playful. That's what it looks like anyway, in terms of the way they interact and just pop up, flash their lights, zip off. And it probably is, in my opinion, and I mean, this is my opinion. There's no way any evidence to support this. It's probably there's a way to kind of just alter your perception, open up your eyes, and make you try to think, what is the point of this? And some people park it and leave it and don't do anything with it. And some people run with it and really want to decipher what the hell is this about. And I think with the Barney Hill one as well, it's quite funny because they drew a map and stuff as well. Carl Sagan must be like, as if they would give them the keys, the map of the universe and how they got here and all these different things. And there's me studying the skies and doing TV shows and stuff, and they dare pick them over me. But that's probably one of the main reasons why they didn't do it as well. I mean, I appreciate it's a difficult question to ask as well. And I do want to speak about the Pascagoula case because I spoke to Philip Mantle as well, who wrote a great book on that as well. He was very close to them. And I know that's one of the most, it's an incredible case, and there's tons of evidence for it as well, for a UFO case in particular. But what do you think the objective of these experiences, well, especially when they pop down and flash their lights or people get abducted? Have you got some sort of conclusion or theory would be the better way to ask?
The more, let me tell you, one of the little secrets I've learned, and I think you can apply this to many aspects of life other than UFOs. The more you know, the less you understand.
True.
Now, I don't mean that's a dead end place, but when you learn a new fact, when you open up to a reality or a situation and get new facts, you're actually increasing your level of ignorance at the same time. And by that, I mean, everything I've learned, every new fact that seems to be part of the picture, part of the story, generally leads to 5 or 10 new questions to which I don't have answers. In that sense, it increases my ignorance. But another way to put it is it increases my curiosity. So with the, let me just add about the abductions. I had a great conversation some years ago with J. Allen Hynek, the Air Force consultant of the Michigan case, who used the phrase famously, swamp gas, could be, maybe. It was understood, oh, he did explain it all away as swamp gas. So I talked with him later. So what was it like, Alan, when the abductions entered the picture? You know, first there were close encounters of the first kind. They're seen by 500 feet up in the day or night, either a craft or some kind of an object, or at night they're seen as lights. Close encounters of the second kind are they come down and make contact with trees or with earth. They leave burn marks. Close encounters of the third kind are the craft land, and sometimes beings are seen outside the craft by deputy sheriffs, which is how some of those first. So that the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind referred to the landings and the beings. Close encounters of the fourth kind are the abductions. So I asked Allen Hynek, I said, when people began to report abductions, what was your response? Do you remember it? And he laughed, the most raucous belly laugh. And he said, I remember it very well, Keith. It was like, oh, great. This is just great. And he meant that sardonically. Yeah. He meant, now my problems begin. Yeah. And by that, he said, he was simply acknowledging the very human level, that this was a new form of evidence that made it far more complicated. In some sense, it was logical. They kept coming closer. First, close encounters of the first, second, third kind, now the fourth kind, where they actually take people from their bedrooms and from their cars into these craft, or so it's reported. I always say, and so it's reported. Some kind of reality to those experiences. He said, oh, it's just great. Meaning I knew that my job was suddenly much more difficult. And I said, did you ever think, and I said, I ask you this quite sincerely, was there ever a part of you that thought of just not wanting to deal with it? He said, not really. Because I was trained as a scientist. I loved my work as a scientist, was to open to data that I might find perplexing, confusing, bewildering. But I knew that I had no basis unless I wanted to turn in my science card at the doorway. I had no basis, nor did my colleague Jacques Vallée, the astronomer that he worked with very closely. We had no right to dismiss this phenomenon, but nor did we have an obligation to take it at face value. Simply because, so it's to say something real. These are real experiences. What's happening at the event level? You know, so you asked me the question. I don't, still to this point, don't fully know. I know there are patterns. The abductees, people who are taken and then returned, often report that their genetic material, the sperm and ova, are taken, and that they believe that a new race of hybrid human alien beings are being generated. Jacques Vallée, the researcher I mentioned, famously, he said, look, these are real experiences, but we have to look at the fact. I often want to slip into my French accent because he does have the French accent. And he very often said, you know, my experience of this, my understanding of this phenomenon became far broader when I realized in my book, Passport to Magonia, so I'll stop with the accent. And he said, I realized that in the fairy faith
Yeah.
of Northern Europe, there are babies taken
Hmm.
and returned with aliens. In the Islamic tradition, there are phenomena known as jinn,
Hmm.
intermediate paraphysical beings. Um, in the Greek tradition, there are the daimones, the intermediate paraphysical. They exist in an intermediate or imaginal realm, not imaginary, meaning made up, but a realm of the imagination that is a subtler form of perception than our gross senses, that we see phenomena that are real. I know many abductees, those who have the experiencers is what they generally
Yeah.
be called now. They get impatient with these kinds of interpretations. I'm not trying to explain it away by adopting these connections to fairies and jinn and uh, Greek tradition of the daimons or demons in the Christian tradition.
Hmm.
But these are frames of reference that seem to account for similar phenomena. They don't explain it. To say that these are just modern demons doesn't explain it either. Well, what are demons? You
Yeah.
can keep pushing it back, but it's finally a broader framework. So it's Jacques Vallée came up with the idea that it's very possible that a larger intelligence is actually inducing the belief that they are creating a race of hybrids. I asked him, well, why would you say it's like a pantomime? He said, yes, this is what abductees are shown. So I said, you're saying that they could be shown this by a real intelligence. What would be the purpose? He said, well, perhaps it is to influence our beliefs. It is
Yeah.
to influence our spirituality. Who knows where our spiritual beliefs come from in the first place? So he actually added, he says, the reason I'm inclined to doubt the literalness of the hybrid
Yeah.
race creation is because these beings, with their ability to paralyze witnesses in an easy move, could easily come in and take over a blood bank in some major city some night when everybody's asleep. They could get all the genetic material they need in one visit. Why would they need to make these exaggerated dramatic renditions of the same elementary, but they tend to conduct these same physical examinations. He said, what kind of medical students are these aliens? Don't they have the basics now of human physiology? Why do they continue to do these rudimentary physical exams? Don't they talk to each
True.
other,
Yeah.
exchange
Yeah.
notes in the medical school? So these are not questions meant to debunk.
Yeah.
No, they're meant to probe more deeply. A real phenomenon could be interacting with us in ways that should not be taken at face value, nor automatically dismissed. There's that big intermediate realm. I say in the book, this phenomenon needs more of a waiting room. We need a place where we can wait. I use that phrase like in a doctor. You come to the doctor's waiting room and you wait. You sit quietly until the doctor can see you. And that's a metaphor for sit quietly and ruminate on the experience. There's not enough in this field, in my view, ability to wait, sit with these questions, don't reach automatic conclusions, but wait with these questions. Take them to the waiting room. For example, are abductions real or unreal? Well, they're real experiences. But what event, uh, what is the event level reality when supposedly a saucer is over the house and someone is levitated out of the house, no one else in the neighborhood sees it? Okay,
Yeah.
then, but there are cases, I want to totally point out the complexity. There are cases where other people in the neighborhood did see the saucer over the house. So there's every attempt to, as again, Jeff Kripal at Rice University says, Keith, the UFO subverts everything. The UFO phenomenon subverts everything, and by which he meant all of our best theories eventually get subverted, but there is a core reality going on, and the experiencers, the witnesses, are the key.
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely.
important key.
Yeah. And I think you're 100% right when you said about have some patience with it, and because it is easy to run around and try to figure this out, and you can't figure this out unless you're in unless I know you get individuals who they say they're in contact with X amount of beings, and I can't really comment on that per se, but I think to deal with it itself is would be rudimentary as well for them just to come down and do those basic kind of examinations, which they can do. As you said, they can get that information anyway if they've got that technological advancement. So in my opinion, and I agree, it is more, it's deeper than that, than kind of the materialistic taking stuff like that. Maybe a part of it, maybe they're testing more reactions of how we deal with that. But I think to kind of the belief systems, and you look through, if you look in the past as well, as you mentioned, all that ancient history and cultures as well, how they worshipped these higher beings as well. And this come from them performing particular feats that were extraordinary to anyone witnessing it. And then that kind of opens up your portal in terms of what is possible. So I think the belief system could be it, but it still makes me wonder. I mean, it's just the human condition in my mind anyway. For what purpose? I was speaking to Grant Cameron a couple of months ago on the podcast as well. He's a great guy as well, on the same wave of all of this topic as well. And he come up with the thing which was very profound for me because I never really heard of it. And I may have heard of it, but not the way he put it. But he said it's just, you know, you're on the center court, you're playing the game, experience it and just enjoy it. Right, you've got a ticket to the stadium. He said you got a ticket to the Super Bowl when he's American. I'm not going to do an American accent. Super Bowl. There we go. Just because you're jumping on accents as well, may as well get involved. He was like, just enjoy it, just experience it. And he was like, it's all about knowledge sharing and expanding your knowledge. And when you learn something, you then relearn something else, and it's continual. And then if you look at our history in terms of where we're going, I mean, you could argue as well that we knew more before, back in the day, more spiritually, because as we've advanced, we've parked that stuff. But I think it could be just a way to expand knowledge, open up our eyes, preparation for what, and the motivation to what. I mean, there's all these theories about raising global consciousness and all these different sides of things. It could be well towards that, but I think if we're just being present, which is echoed in every single ancient literature that we can think of in terms of just being in that present moment, whether it's praying, meditating, or whatever, and we just have our patience, we can kind of deal with it. And when the mind is quiet, and that's typically when the answers come anyway. That's the way I kind of
Great point. And I often say maybe the deepest question isn't who they are, but who we are. Who are we? And I have a chapter in the book called Who Do We Think We Are?
Yeah.
And the purpose of that chapter is to point to the presence of supernormal or supernatural capacities in the human realm already. For example, if in the Zimbabwe, Africa student aerial school case where 65 students were on the playground, we could go into that if you want, but I'll just give the summary because there's just a specific element I want to point to here. Students saw a craft, beings outside the craft, moving in strange ways, locking, making eye contact. And when John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist who became interested in this subject, and I got to know Dr. Mack pretty well. I used to call him John because he was a good friend. When he flew into Zimbabwe to study this case, and he would interview the students, he said, and the students said, I felt they were telling us that we need to be careful about how we use technology, and we have to be careful about the ecology. And he interviewed these students separately, and they were all saying things. They were all having information. They were describing information. And he said, how, like a good researcher, how did this communication happen? How did they communicate this to you? And one of the girls said, through my conscience. He said, your conscience? Well, she was 8 years old. And what she meant was my consciousness. It was mentally, she didn't know the word telepathy. He said, so you're describing, you heard their thoughts, you felt their thoughts directly. He was not trying to put words in their mouth, but trying to give them language for understanding. So when I finally occurred to me when I was working on this chapter, I thought, we very often talk about the fact that young people, or for that matter, any witness will describe telepathic communications with these entities. And then the emphasis is, yes, well, how did the entities communicate? What gets overlooked is, if that kind of communication happens, it's because we have the capacity for telepathy anyway.
Yeah.
In other words, what gets awakened in these witnesses is, there's no evidence that the aliens suddenly create telepathic communication. They communicate telepathically to people who have never had the experience before, perhaps, especially young students. And in fact, one of the common aftermaths of a UFO or a near-death experience is a sudden upsurge of paranormal, supernormal, supernatural perceptions. I mean, it can be very strange stuff, such as after a UFO sighting, you walk by street lamps and the lights go on and off.
Mm.
There is some evidence. I know this is the debunkers just love to snicker at this. There's the proof. When science, you've got to be able to replicate it, make it happen more than once. I fully acknowledge that's the scientific standard. And I'm not invoking a pure scientific claim here. But after a while, the sheer number of reports of people who do report interaction with electrical and physical systems that are not supposed to be possible. They're called synchronicities. When mind and matter cross, they're not supposed to cross. Western Cartesian, the philosopher Descartes said the mind is inside us and the rest of the world is out here. It's dead matter, and never the twain shall meet. But they do meet. I often say that the UFO phenomenon and paranormal phenomena in general didn't get the memo that they're not real. The memo was distributed, they didn't get it. In other words, they don't need the memo. There's a larger part of reality. Maybe we've got to start revising our memos, revising our maps to, and we're doing it. Science works this way. A paradigm is an explanation of reality that seems to fit until there are anomalies, things that don't fit. So scientists do their best to try to address the anomalies. For example, the near-death experience. How can we explain these various features? There are some aspects of the near-death experience and UFO experiences with non-ordinary communications that are not explainable in normal material science.
Just very quickly, sorry, did you I've just remembered something, sorry to interrupt. Did you have any communication during your near-death experience? Because you said you had a life review and stuff like that. Did you actually speak to any entities there?
I did not have an orientation to anything like heaven because of my religion. I just put that out. I did not have but I had experience of a celestial realm that I would call the afterlife. That walked like and talked like and sounded like what we would call the afterlife. I'm very cautious to say, did I visit the afterlife? I experienced a reality consistent with reports. I saw and interacted with deceased relatives and friends. I had an experience particularly of seeing a great uncle named Sam, Uncle Sam, that I did not know had died.
Oh, wow.
So when I came back from this reality of seeing them, when I say that, I don't know that heaven and this world are, quote, heaven, and this world are radically different places. I think the dead, to the degree that the consciousness of individual consciousness survives in a differentiated form rather than being reabsorbed into the collective consciousness, both are very plausible to me. But anyway, I did not know that my Uncle Sam had died. He had died 6 months earlier. So after this was all over, and I began to talk to my mom and other relatives about this, and they didn't poo-poo it. They just simply didn't know what to make of it.
Yeah.
My family was not metaphysically clear. And I said something about, this is the question I had in mind. I didn't ask my mom. I said, how is Uncle Sam? She said, he passed away this year. No, I didn't make a point of saying, well, I saw him too. No, I didn't do that. I didn't want to layer that on, but it was just another data point.
Yeah.
So, and I also had an experience that I did not know anything about as a feature of the near-death experience, the reliving or life review process, or reliving. It is more like a reliving. In a matter probably of seconds, almost instantly, reliving of your life in terms of the key events and an understanding with forgiveness, an understanding of why people behave the way they behave, what I didn't understand in that interaction due to my impatience or what that person didn't understand about my motivations. I felt as if I saw, it was a big download of seeing your entire life. And that's another one to come back with, because then you come back to time and space, come back to identity with this body, when memory is far more segmented and far more limited. But there is still this memory of having relived my entire life, and I can't even fully.
In a few seconds as well. That must have been like to experience all of that in a couple of moments. I mean, you probably had to be in that space to take that in and remain sane. Probably you won't be
because it is a large. I think that there are, these phenomena can't be explained solely in terms of 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. Well, it probably an indication that what we call dimensions, there are probably more dimensions.
Yeah.
And heaven, the dead, may be a dimension. I'm pretty certain that when I leave this realm permanently, when I leave the body and it's my last time, I will probably leave in the same way I left in Hawaii. I think Hawaii, my near-death experience in Hawaii was a view of how it happens.
Yeah.
And I must say, I also came back not with a determination that life continues, but it was just a sense that I'd lost I wasn't afraid of death, but I was aware that I didn't fear death after that had happened. I'd lost any fear of death that I may have had. And I've noticed when my mother died, other family, other friends, I have a kind of knack for being with them. It's not an accomplishment or an achievement. I think I've seen that edge where life and death meet, and I'm not worried. And in the book, I actually end the book with my friend Mary, who was with me on the shore in Hawaii, who was dying, and I went to see her, and we had a final goodbye in which I simply said, I asked her, I said, do you remember the times in your life, I'm sure you do, when things were pretty lousy and miserable, but you never stopped trusting, being? She said, yes. And she smiled. And I said, keep that up. In other words, what I came away with from my experience in Hawaii, and maybe my rooftop experience, is that we can trust being.
Yeah.
Whatever is next, whatever is larger. It's not a Pollyanna Walt Disney movie necessarily, but the reality is fierce. The writer Carlos Castaneda, who wrote the books about shamanism, and the teacher Don Juan, I asked him, I did an interview with him, I asked him, is ultimately, Carlos, is reality a safe place? And he smiled. He said, I asked that to Don Juan once. It was his teacher in sorcery and shamanism.
Yeah.
He said, what did he tell you? He said, oh, yes, reality is a safe place. It may kill you, but it will teach you something in the process. Knowing. It will teach you something worth knowing. It may kill you, but it will teach you something worth knowing. I remember in my near-death experience, Leslie, I thought I was going through the tunnel with loud roaring noise and lights flashing, like a psychedelic trip.
Yeah.
I compared it later when I did explore psychedelics. I remembered thinking that this may kill me, but it can't hurt me. And the sense that, oh, dead isn't dead. So I can't say with certainty. I would not tell somebody for sure that you're going to continue. I don't know that. But I can say there's nothing to worry about, in my view. And I came away with it with a sense of trust.
Trust. I mean, that was what I was going to ask. How's life? How have you lived life? And it sounds like you lived it with just trust, right? That what will be, and I'll just keep where I am because that's where I am. There's I was watching a video a couple of weeks ago, and it was some of the channel now, but it was like a documentary type thing. And then the guy was like, what did he say? He went, the universe is perfect. It's us that makes it imperfect. And I was like, wow, that is just so profound, really. And just touching on that as well, you mentioned in your book on that chapter, I can't remember what it was again, but you was like the reality of things. He was like, we're going on like we're figuring out things, but that stuff's already been there. It was just something along them lines. We just got to develop new frameworks for it. Do you recall that at all? Because when I read that bit there, I was like, that makes so much sense because we're going to like we figured this all out and stuff, but really it's always been there.
Well, in another interview I did about the book, the host was trying to be generous. It said, sounds like you probably subscribe to the idea that there's a reason for everything. Everything has a reason. And I said, I know where you're coming from, but I don't know that. I trust the thing. What I do trust is the best way to proceed is to accept things as they are. That this is what's happening. I'm very often aware. I'll be standing in a grocery line, and sometimes I'll say, "Oh, this is happening." It's kind of a moment when I feel like I'm a little stoned, and I'm not a stoner.
Yeah.
I'm just not. I've had my share of experiences, but I'm not. I don't. In fact, I'm not. I don't use intoxicants at this point because it just clouds my ability to perceive rather than expanding it. But I'll just sometimes be standing in a grocery line and say, "Oh, this is happening," and the cashier says, "How are you?" I said, "I'm just great." I said, "I could come up with a complaint. Do you want to hear it?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, good. Don't indulge me." And therefore, I've just had a great interaction with a human being on a lighthearted and yet kind of deep level. We're both kind of saying, is there any, a teacher spiritual teacher that I got to know once said, "Keith, apart from whatever your mind may tell you, putting any mental, apart from what the mind's story might be, is there anything about this moment that is incomplete?" That's a good distinction. Apart from what the mind will tell you, "Oh, I should have won the lottery. My friend should have been here earlier. The plane should have arrived sooner. I should have gotten to Dallas fast." All of that's the mind. Apart from your mind's opinion, is there anything about this moment that isn't complete, maybe even perfect? Doesn't mean you're happy or that if someone dies, that's not perfect. The moment itself is what it is. And that's not just a cliche. There's a lot, like you say, a lot of problems disappear when that analysis is brought to bear. There's still real problems. I don't go through life completely, I get cut off in traffic. I'm as irritated as the next guy, but I catch it faster.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I want to be pissed off for the next hour? That's my choice.
It's logical, isn't it?
The interaction with that driver, but I can choose how it's going to affect the rest of my day.
Yeah. I think this is why I love philosophy as well. And I know we're going on around the circles a little bit. We will talk about some UFOs, I promise, soon. To consciousness world, I joke. But yeah, that's why I love philosophy, and I love stoicism as well. Because I always wondered, because I as a kid growing up, I'm an Aries. Not that I believe in star signs or anything too much per se, but I had a little temper and stuff anyway. But I'd always, as I got older, I learned to kind of control it a little bit. But I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, which is bringing myself back to being present and in that moment and realizing where my brain was going. And I matured as well. That happens with age as well. You tried to go surfing in dangerous waves. We've done some silly things when we were kids, right? It's part of learning. But the philosophical, stoic way of looking at things and just kind of taking yourself back from the situation, trying to apply some logical process to it, even if the situation doesn't demand any sort of logic to it. I think it's very great. It's the great way to kind of live. And it's difficult, as you said, we're human beings and we can lose ourselves in situations, but being able to recover is probably what defines, hopefully anyway, in terms of being happy and unhappy. It's a very fine line between that as well. Anyway, I've kind of went off on
let me touch on how I bring that into the book then, because
yes,
in the process of making sense of my own experiences, it put me on a path of asking big questions, spiritual questions, if you will, philosophical. And I had the privilege, and it was a great privilege, of getting to know Joseph Campbell, the great mythological teacher who wrote the book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, in which he defined the 3 stages of a rite of passage or initiation. And I ended up bringing, and I said I had the chance to meet him and study when he retired from Sarah Lawrence College. He was not yet famous for this work, but he would soon be made famous by the journalist Bill Moyers in a PBS series called The Power of Myth. But I took a couple of workshops with him at a couple of centers, or at a center in California. And in any case, his model is 3 stages. First, in the great myths of the world, there tend to be these 3 stages. The protagonist, the person is called to adventure. They're separated from their normal reality. The myth tell the story of just going about his business. The protagonist, or the hero, he calls him the hero. The hero slips and crosses a bridge he doesn't expect. He's no longer in his ordinary reality. The second stage then is the betwixt and between, a large marginal transitional period. He's left his normal reality. He's no longer in the world with the rest of his community. He's in a middle realm, he or she, of again, betwixt and between, not quite here, not quite there. And there are ordeals and adventures and challenges and tasks that are very often part of the world's myths that the hero must accomplish. And these are meant, according to Campbell, to teach us we must accomplish these things too when we are in the dark woods, the dark forest, which in psychological terms is the unconscious. Yeah. The unconscious has a nice abstract, or not so nice, it's a rather boring term. I prefer to think when we're in those periods of life where we're in the dark forest, when we don't have light, we don't have clarity. And then the third stage is if you complete the tasks the hero is faced with and finds help from sources he didn't expect and finds adversaries he didn't expect, completes the journey, and then returns with a boon, B-O-O-N, or a insight for the community that he had left. So I bring that into the book for witnesses and experiencers who have these spiritual emergencies in life, who are suddenly thrust into larger circumstances. Their sense of identity, it can be due to a natural disaster, the death of a loved one, or an encounter with the paranormal, or with the UFO entity, or a craft. They're all part of the same structure. There's a separation from your normal reality, a period of time spent in the woods asking questions about something that the rest of your society says didn't happen, doesn't happen, can't happen. You know that it is your calling to figure this out. So then there's the return. So I talk about these phenomena ultimately as life challenges, to really open to I define the UFO phenomenon ultimately as a call from the cosmos, a metaphoric call from the cosmos to open to larger realities. These are callings, and I think this phenomenon is pointing to the fact that reality is comprised of more dimensions that make phenomena possible that are not officially possible. And until a call is just a monologue until there's a response. I think we're called to make a response to this phenomenon.
Yeah.
There's a call, and it becomes a dialogue. A calling alone is a monologue, a call from the cosmos. It becomes a dialogue when we answer back. So my book is an attempt to answer back to this phenomenon, trying to describe its complexity, its many levels and dimensions, and to take it as a learning opportunity.
Absolutely. And what you mentioned as well is what I've spoken to people before, and Grant Cameron, again, he said the same thing. You know, like he said, you've got to write this stuff out. You've got to share that message. That's your message. That's what you've been given. It's an opportunity for you to get that out. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've taken on board. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like, I think your first book as well, you didn't even plan to include some of the stuff in there, right? Angels and Demons.
It's called Angels and Aliens.
Wait, Angels and Demons. That's
because angels and demons are usually that's usually the juxtaposition. Is it angelic or demonic? But I called it Angels and Aliens, which is a different kind of juxtaposition, bringing together the religious frame and the alien frame, which was a really
I got mixed up with the book, the one like the Da Vinci Code one. That's what I got mixed up with briefly.
Right. Yeah, he sold more copies, the author of the Da Vinci
Code. but yeah, Angels and Aliens, you didn't plan to include some of your stuff in there, right? And then you just, in terms of your experiences.
I just, the process of writing, I did not intend to bring in, I told you before the show, I did not intend to bring in my own near-death experience or my childhood experience on the rooftop when I sat down to write the book. And I actually had a sort of a conversation with my own daimon, which is my term for the Greek idea that we have a sense of who we are that doesn't match who we think we are. There's a larger part of ourselves that can be perceived as a calling or a guidance from which we can get information. So in working on this book, I can't say I walked around the house talking to presences, no, But at some point, I just closed my eyes and said, should I bring in my own experiences in this book? And the response wasn't a voice in my head, but it was a very visceral response. And it was a question back. Do you want to tell the truth?
Mm.
You want your book to be true? And the word was true. And I didn't have anything more to say. I said, yeah, bring in my own experiences. And in so doing, it's a richer book. It was richer for me in writing it. So there's a way in which I could have easily could have left out my own experiences. That sort of made my book more credible, less subjective. But the phenomenon is both subjective and objective. I call it omnijective. It cuts across the divide between the subjective and the objective. And so I decided to join that spirit and bring my own experiences in.
Exactly. Yeah, and as you said, if it's a calling towards you, then that was your thing to do anyway. That was the task at hand. All right, I'm gonna switch sides a little bit towards something a bit more materialistic, and we could talk about the fun stuff like maybe disclosure a little bit. But I guess because there's a lot of stuff happening. Well, I say a lot of stuff. Obviously, Lou Elizondo, imminent. His books have come out now. There's been some other things floating around right now. So I just wanted to find out, in your perspective, like, what does disclosure look like for you?
Well, first of all, let me say there's a chapter in the book in which I describe getting a phone call from the New York philanthropist who's now deceased, Lawrence Rockefeller.
Yes, let's talk about
heard
that.
of my first book, Angels and Aliens, and he read the book. It was on his desk. He was 80-some years old. His secretary called me one day and asked if I would talk with him. I said, sure. I knew of his interest in the UFO topic. And he said, so his purpose in calling, we had a nice, I described the larger context of our relationship and ultimately our friendship. But he specifically was calling me because he had decided, because he had understood that President Clinton and Hillary Clinton, who were still young in their administration, 2 years into their first term, were interested in this subject. They had both responded to queries to try to get to the bottom of it, which many presidents have said they're going to try to do and don't generally succeed, which is a complex issue. In any case, he decided to focus on the Roswell, New Mexico crash, whatever crashed in the desert.
And this is the Rockefeller, right? This is the one Illuminati, that group, right?
Well, that's part of the challenge of writing about people with names like Rockefeller.
Yeah. He's one of the good guys, though, right?
The Rockefeller family is a big family with a lot of interests. They've been involved with a lot of things, medical, industrial complex, you name it. Mm-hmm. Lawrence Rockefeller was the member of the family who was sort of the black sheep in this sense. Yeah. He was interested in metaphysical, spiritual, philosophical. He studied philosophy at Columbia as a young Princeton. Excuse me. He would not like me to get that wrong. Princeton. He was a Princeton man, and so he had a life calling of his own. And he did this as a civic venture to try to get more transparency. Long story short, after working with some members of the Clinton administration to dig down into the federal bureaucracy and maybe pull out maybe enough time had passed to tell some truth about what had happened at Roswell, the response came back, no, nothing happened that isn't part of the official story. So in other words, there was no breakthrough, and there still hasn't been a breakthrough on what happened at Roswell. There are different opinions about something crashed. Was it merely a weather balloon? Probably not. There seemed to be more crash debris. That doesn't necessarily make it extraterrestrial, but that's a very strong argument that it was. Could have been a weapon system of our own. Maybe something from Russia got through in 1947, got through our airspace. I don't know. But anyway, so let's bring it up to the current time. I'm often asked, do you cover disclosure in your book? And I've learned to respond with a kind of trickster response. I say, the whole book is about disclosure. I'm disclosing the phenomenon. These events are a disclosure.
Yeah.
What they're disclosing is that we live in a larger reality than we acknowledge. No, okay, beyond that, does my book deal with disclosure? Not primarily. I respect the disclosure people who are really experts on it. I will say this much. Having been an observer of this for quite a long time, if I could say to those who are fairly new to the phenomenon, especially, let's say, new since 2017, the famous New York Times front page story, Pentagon has a secret task force studying the phenomenon they've spent decades ridiculing. UFOs are now called UAP, and Luis Elizondo was the director of the program, blah, blah, blah. He's out with his new book now called Imminent. So in any case, the new generation, if you will, of ufologically interested people, ufologists, are, in my view, tend to be inclined to believe, oh, well, this disclosure in 2017 must mean we're right on the verge of disclosure about the true facts, what the government knows. And my response to that is the idea that the lid on the government cover-up is about to blow sky high has been prominent for 8 decades. Each decade has a new version of it. New papers are released, sometimes documents, sometimes they're turned out to be forgeries, sometimes they haven't been debunked. The Bob Lazar case in Las Vegas, he was shown what he believed, what he claims were a craft that had been recovered and that we had reverse engineered. None of these stories ever really makes it to the clear line of definitive proof. Now, in addition to Elizondo saying he has seen things or he's heard of things, he's just on with Joe Rogan the other day. He described something and Rogan said to Lou, "Did you see it yourself?" He goes, "No, but I have it on good authority." I'm willing to accept that he has it on good authority. That he hears from people that it was real, but it's always that gap.
Yeah.
So, and the same with David Grush, the military intelligence official who has gone deeply into these studies and has concluded that it's very likely there are recovered craft and biological material that is being maintained ostensibly by the aeronautics corporations. Well, bring it forward. In other words, that's an empirical claim that there is evidence. So the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, the CGIC, or IGCC, anyway, I get the initials wrong. The Inspector General of the Intelligence Community has been given the names and dates and locations. Well, let's see how many more whistleblowers there are. Maybe they'll be coming forward. So I don't dismiss it when I say, oh, any day now, the lid on the government cover-up is going to blow sky high. All I'm saying is I've heard it enough, I've heard it a lot, and it always falls short. But maybe this time for sure.
Fingers crossed. But I do get what you're saying, and obviously you've, even though you look like 30 or 25, you've obviously seen it a lot more over the years, and the whole evidence side of things, it gives a space for debunkers to just pop through it. I think it was, however, I do think there's been a and I mean, obviously, Congress are discussing it now, which is a big bit of movement, and the public are widely, I guess, they're definitely open to the idea a lot more now compared to how it was before. I personally think we're going to get FO, excuse the French. I don't know why they say it's French, but it's not really French. But we're not going to get anything from the government. It's more going to be we have to really force their hand, because if they do have stuff, and I believe they do have stuff, on what level I'm not sure, but then they're not going to give it up lightly, because it's not just the it's more about what they've been doing over the years to keep that secret covered. And we talk about ontological shock for the public about them being like, oh, aliens are real. It could be more towards the American people and these other world governments in terms of what they've been doing to hide and keep this stuff. I mean, imagine all these air defense companies, Boeing and Lockheed and all these other different things, and they've apparently been murdering people, kidnapping people, threatening people after all these years, reverse engineering this technology, which could potentially have free energy. Imagine the trust that will be lost from the public to the American government or any government that's been doing this. I think that could be the real shock there, because no one's going to trust anything they say. It's going to demand a huge revamp. But just in reference to the stuff you mentioned with disclosure as well, I think, I mean, we're talking about catastrophic disclosure. I know Lou and Grush and all of these guys are trying to do it the diplomatic way.
Controlled disclosure.
Yeah, controlled, yeah.
And there's an argument that whether he knows it or not, Elizondo is part of that. He's been enlisted, if you will, his job, whether he knows it or not. and he may know it. In other words, it's to gradually release, gradually acclimate. The debunker, as opposed to true skeptic. I'm a skeptic. I'm a skeptic toward these claims about disclosure. Doesn't mean I'm a debunker. Okay, these are empirical. It's what's being said is that there's evidence being held by McDonnell Douglas and Lockheed Martin. First of all, I must add, I'm not the only one to point this out. If Lockheed Martin has been identified as probably one of the groups possessing this, you can imagine there might be some U-Haul trucks moving the stuff very quickly. And I use U-Haul trucks metaphorically. They wouldn't need U-Hauls. They would be moving this. So, I mean, when you have this kind of notice, if in fact they have possession, they're probably moving it someplace else, even as we speak. So it's a bonanza for a screenwriter. I'm not a screenwriter, but if you're in Hollywood, this kind of stuff is just built in for kind of Robert Ludlum type espionage, where get Tom Cruise involved and Matt Damon, and let's do a great disclosure. I hear that I haven't really investigated it. I hear Steven Spielberg is working on a new UFO movie.
Yeah, he is.
I'm going to do a web search when I get off this show, because I want to see, what's it going to be like? Is it going to be a documentary, or is it going to be another like Close Encounters?
Let me Google it now.
Let's do it. Let's do it in real time. Why should we?
He's got a new one, but I forgot what it's. I think it might be a documentary. Okay, Universal Pictures announced that Spielberg's film will open in theaters on May 15th, 2026. It's unclear what the project, which the studio describes as a new original event film. It is about UFOs, though, so we don't know. But it's called The Dish. It's called The Dish. The Dish.
So 2026? 2026?
Correct, May next year. Oh, no, actually, what year were you at? Oh, yeah. Sorry, lost in time.
Well, that's really a long lead date. He must be, it takes a long time, I guess. Well, I still think Close Encounters, from the sheer artistic standpoint, is still my favorite. Although I like the other one in recent years, and suddenly Amy Adams.
What's it called?
Contact, not Contact.
Yes, it is Contact. Well, I loved Contact. Was brilliant. I loved Contact. I loved it.
That's the Jodie Foster one, right? Is Jodie Foster?
Yeah.
That's not the one I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the other one that was based on deciphering the linguistic structure and the
signs. No, what? No.
Is it Amy Adams, that redheaded actor?
This is gonna piss me off now. We're just having a live Google session right now.
A couple of guys doing a live Googling. We're saving you the trouble, people.
Exactly.
As Dame Edna would say, possums, we're doing the research for you.
It's lost me. I don't know. I give up. We have to go.
Anyway, I still think Close Encounters is a great movie. I just saw it again recently. It stands the test of time, especially because of the what?
The Fourth Kind. Have you seen The Fourth Kind?
No, I haven't.
No. It's that I watched that film twice. I literally grabbed my dad. Went to cinema. I watched. I was like, Dad, we're going to the cinema. I need to watch this again. Literally same day. It's a horror one, but I won't spoil it. But I mean, The Fourth Kind is about abductions, right? I'll pop a link to you after. I love that film. But yeah, why do you like The Close Encounters? Go on, you're going to say something.
Well, there's that theme. You remember Richard Dreyfuss going back from the first moment that thing lands on top of his car, and then his skin gets burned.
Yeah.
He starts he becomes obsessed with building, but basically the mountain in is it Wyoming, or is it Montana? Devil's Peak. That's where the craft is going to be landing. So people from around the world are sort of tuned in to this. So he tries to create on his dining room table using mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
Family decides that Dad is really lost it. And they lose. The mom and the kids leave. It's a traumatic moment. And it's a good example. It's a good portrayal of the way these experiences can break families apart. Mm-hmm. If you have seen it and your spouse has not seen it, and you have some unfinished business with it, And it's not just that you need therapy, you need answers. That's what drove everybody in that movie to Devil's Tower. They wanted answers. So again, it's a fictional film. It's clearly not a documentary, but it was based on real life um, aspects of the phenomenon.
No, it's true, and it's a resounding. I mean, my wife right now, she said she doesn't really get it. I'll try and explain it to her sometimes. And she gets scared. So I'm like, I'll stop speaking about it. I'll just speak to my wall, or I'll speak to. This is why I like doing this podcast and stuff as well. I get to speak to people and speak openly, and not that she judges, or not that I get judged. I do have friends that laugh. They'll be like, because I went through a period, I just have loads of scratches on my body, and I didn't know where it would come from. Didn't have a cat. They'll be like, "Oh, you've been abducted again." I'll be like, "Yes." Are you jealous? But inside, I'm like, "What the fuck is going on?" Anyway, we're talking about something, disclosure, right? So you're saying basically, we just need to. Well, you're not that you're skeptical on it, but you're just a bit apprehensive, bearing in mind what's happened before. What do you think is going to cause disclosure, in your opinion, if we call it disclosure in a sense of the president standing up and being like, "Hey guys, we're in contact," or there are beings out
First of all, somebody has, I think on a good faith basis, David Grush has met with people. He is an intelligence officer. He factored in that this might be an elaborate hoax. He looked at the sense in which this could be disinformation, that I'm being used as a conduit. He knows how to factor that in. So I'm pretty sure David Grush has met with real people who have firsthand experience or claim to have firsthand experience. I don't have the details in mind, but the question is, where's the beef eventually?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so I don't know. I mean, when will disclosure happen? It depends on what there is to be disclosed. I sometimes make the case that what might well be, based on the way this phenomenon behaves, and so able to cut the velocities of speed, the executions of strange turns, materialize and then dematerialize, seemingly disappear on the spot. Technology or phenomenology that is beyond, it's almost magical.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, does the government have it all figured out and they don't want us to know? Or is what they don't want us to know that they don't know? Could it be that they are hiding? What's the likelihood the government is going to say, a 4-star general is going to come out with all the medals and say, we are here to announce and disclose, yes, there is something in our airspace that is conducting with impunity the following maneuvers. We don't know what it is or where it's from. We will keep you posted. People, go about your lives, nothing to worry about. No, it won't happen that way. So I'm actually not making a case for the morality of a cover-up, but I can understand the military and government in general does not generally acknowledge that they don't have the answers. Government's job is to reinforce they do have the answers. I say that as somebody who's not real keen about most of what's called government. So the more I've learned about government and how it works, I want less of it. Thank you very much. But in any case, I don't expect the government to disclose that they don't know what it's about. So I think I'll tell you what I think is going to happen. This people who've been expecting, because the 2017 New York Times story came out, and many people will assume, therefore, disclosure is about to happen. The cover-up is going to be revealed. The truth will be told. I don't think it's going to be that fast. Whatever there, I think the larger pattern is, no, these comes in waves. These predictions of disclosure come in waves. So I think what we're going to see is continuing reports about whistleblower. For example, it is in Congress now. The new disclosure reporting requirements allow whistleblowers to come forward. So we'll be expecting more whistleblowers to come forward. And as they do, and if they're protected, do their stories pan out? So I think in the meantime, as there's going to be a continuing long, by the way, I want to add too, I think if there is something to be hidden, those who are hiding it are going to do better at hiding it. There's a lot of pushback, for example, in the intelligence community. They're saying everybody wants everything released. There's a lot of stuff that's being demanded that be released that will reveal sources and methods of normal intelligence. Now, I'm not a flack for the intelligence community, but I do know there are aspects of American military intelligence that are essential to keep
Sure.
quiet. We don't want Russia and
Sure.
China to know what we're doing. So there's going to be a lot of pushback at the David Grushes of the world. Now, is that because they have evidence of UFOs that they don't want to admit? Or is some of what David Grush is expecting to be released, could these be craft, our own craft, in some cases, that are so highly siloed and compartmentalized that we don't even know what kind of advanced craft that are shaped like falcons? I mean, the technology. So anyway, I don't know. I'm very comfortable saying I don't know. I don't know is a complete sentence.
Yeah.
And I have to say that not only is there not enough of a waiting room in the UFO field, there is a lot of premium priority given to I know. I listen to the various media shows late at night. You know, the shows that deal with the paranormal and UFOs, and the people who claim to have inside knowledge. I mean, these are great storylines, and people who claim to be in the know, and they're going to release it if you buy their new book.
Yeah.
I'm an author of a book. What can I say? But most of what I'm selling in my book is that it's okay to ask the questions and to keep the answers tentative until we know more. Till they're, like I said, what I think is great about the disclosure claims is that they are ultimately empirically testable. There's something that is being said to be hidden, craft and bodies. Well, it's not just belief system, that they're actual craft and bodies that are allegedly there to be disclosed.
If we get
let the disclosure happen.
Yeah, if we get the eminent domain, because they removed that last year, didn't they? Which was going to basically put all of these supposed like Lockheed and these air defense companies, if they had any, I can't remember the exact wording, but on the lines of if they have craft or something like that, they have to kind of release that in particular, and that got gutted, which was strange to do considering. Well, I don't know exactly. They probably put it down to national security and particular information not being shared, but they gutted that. And I know they're trying to go for. Well, we are. I say we. I'm UK here. I'm just supporting from over the seas. The UK do nothing here as well. We're just, I don't know, doing other stuff here, which is not UAP related. But they are going round 2 for the UAPD version 2 with the eminent domain, the kind of presidential election board, that sort of stuff. So the controlled way doing it, that perspective is probably going to be the route to do it. What it looks like, who knows? Disclosure's probably here already, maybe because there might be wandering around amongst us. We don't know. It is for me. I'm just, and it sounds like you're in the same way. And there was a point where I was so focused on getting disclosure and focusing that. And for me, I'm just enjoying the ride. Right? I feel.
Yeah. Let me add one more thing. I'm old enough to remember Daniel Ellsberg, an intelligence agent in former intelligence. He had top secret clearance during the Vietnam War. He released documents called the Pentagon Papers, which revealed a huge amount of deceit about the Vietnam War and our Vietnam policy. President Nixon took him to court, the Justice Department, for exposing state secrets. He went on trial, ultimately was acquitted, I believe. He was ultimately acquitted and lived to tell the story. So he put himself at great risk. I'm wondering, I'm kind of hoping if there are secrets that are being held, is there somebody who's willing to put themselves on the line? I know that classification is severe. So what I'm saying is can we expect some whistleblowers to come forward? And if they don't have complete whistleblower protection, are there going to be some who are willing to tell things that are officially state secrets and risk going to trial? And if so, will there be philanthropists? Lawrence Rockefeller is no longer alive, but will there be philanthropists who are interested in this subject, who will be willing to pay for their legal costs and support their pensions? Because they'll lose their one of the things that is said is you lose your pension if you're retired, and not many people can afford to do that. So I'm wondering if there will be any heroes who will come forward like Daniel Ellsberg and say, there's a larger moral duty. I know I'm violating my security oath, but here are the facts. Here are the names. If the facts are severe enough, they might be putting their lives in danger. It's a lot of big questions in that kind of stuff. Again, I think of the screenplay writer, a lot to work with.
Might be Spielberg's new storyline. Might be the secret one for it. Okay. Well, look, I think we went and we spoke about various different things. It's been a really great conversation, Keith. I'm just before we do finish up, just wanted to know, where can we find you? I'll of course leave all the links to your books and your website and everything else at all. But yeah, where can we find you?
Well, my website is thompsonatlarge.com, Thompson with a P, www.thompsonatlarge.com. Another easy way I find that I did not expect this lifetime to be the case, but Keith Thompson UFO is a good, you can find me that way. You'll find my website that way. The book is available. It's called The UFO Paradox. There's no single paradox. There are many paradoxes with this phenomenon. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, both as a print book and an ebook, and also now as a audio book. It's out. So all of those, and I'm on Twitter at Keith Thompson 1, number 1. So that's basically how you can find me.
Good stuff. All right, cool. Anything you want to say before we finish up? Any parting words?
No, I really enjoyed this conversation. I liked where we've gone. I often close when I'm given a chance to do closing words, as the Zen Buddhist teacher Suzuki Roshi famously wrote a book called Beginner's Mind. And he had a great he attributed positive things to the idea of being a beginner. Meaning a beginner, he said, in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. Which was his way of saying, be a beginner. Be open to many possibilities. To be an expert, and this field is filled with experts, and I say it not entirely in a complimentary way. They know what's possible. The debunker knows none of this is possible. So in the expert's mind, those who've got it all figured out, there are a few possibilities. I think life has lots of possibilities. So be a beginner. Study this phenomenon. Let it shake you up if it does. Keeps you awake at night reading about it. Don't let that happen too many nights in a row. And just follow remember what my 6th grade teacher told me. Follow the evidence wherever it takes you. And ask questions.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Eloquently put. It's great. All right, listen. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak today. We're gonna have to do this again because there was about 100 other questions I wanted to go through. Just trying to control my enthusiasm throughout.
I'd be glad to come back. We can do it again.
Yeah, for sure.
Especially if there's a big event, of some kind. That's what Lou Elizondo was pointing out.
Disclosure. When disclosure happens.
If there is a big event, well, that's always the big if.
Yeah, it's a big if. Exactly. Good stuff. All right, Keith. Take care, man. Nice speaking with you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.